I was folding laundry when the photo came through. My phone buzzed on the windowsill, half buried beneath the heap of mismatched socks and my father's old flannel shirts I still couldn't throw out. A group text, the one they used for birthdays plans, updates the one I'd always thought I was a part of. It was my sister Emma who sent it. "Merry Christmas," from the real crew, she wrote, followed by 5 laughing emojis. The image took a second to load. I remember the machine humming behind me, the faint scent of peppermint still clinging to my sleeves from the cocoa I'd stirred that morning. My hands were still damp from folding the last towel when I picked up the phone and saw it. There they all were. Emma grinning in her signature velvet red. James, his arms slung lazily around his wife's shoulder. Nora, holding her toddler on her hip, her other hand clutching a mug I had gifted her the night before. The tree I decorated stood behind them perfectly lit. My mantle, my fireplace, my home. The photo was sharp, bright, festive, but I wasn't in it. Not only was I missing, I had taken that picture. I had stood behind the camera, told them to scoot in, fixed Nora's scarf before the flash. I remembered how cold my feet had been on the tiles, how I'd tilted the angle just right to hide the old couch's tear. I remembered the moment right before I clicked how I'd smiled to myself, believing despite everything that this was worth it, that I was included. The comments came fast, like bullets through cotton. Emma, much better without the martyr in every shot. James, ha ha ha, Photoshop queen. Had to do it for the vibe. Nora Lomau, cropped like she always crops us out of her pity parties. Then a meme. My face superimposed onto a ghost, floating out of frame. My heart didn't drop. It disappeared, as if it had never belonged to me in the first place. I sat down on the edge of the couch, the one no one had offered to help me replace, when Dad passed. The hem of my sweater rode up, and I didn't fix it. My hands had stopped folding. The room felt cold, even though the fire was still going. Outside, snow fell in silent diagonals, but inside, I couldn't hear anything. Not the clock, not the crackle of the wood, just the ringing in my ears and the sound of my own breath getting smaller. They had laughed while cropping me out of my own life. It wasn't just a photo. It was a declaration, a confirmation of something I hadn't dared say aloud. I wasn't family anymore. Maybe I never had been. I scrolled again. Maybe I'd missed something, a joke I was in, on some softening follow-up. But it was all there, each word etched like a knife against a mirror. I tapped Emma's name, stared at our old thread, the one that used to buzz with late-night talks and recipes. Nothing in months. Tapped James. The last thing he sent me was a Venmo request for Mom's headstone split. Tapped Nora. Just a thumbs up I'd gotten when I asked if her kid liked the birthday present I'd mailed. I went back to the photo, zoomed in. There on the mantle was the candle I lit for Mom every year. In the corner, the bookshelf I built by hand. Even the reindeer napkin rings I had scoured 6 thrift stores to find because they reminded me of our childhood table, my home without me in it. The feeling was hard to name, not rage, not even sorrow. It was something more guttural, more animal, like being banished from a place you built with your own hands. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, washed my hands, wiped down the counter that still had cinnamon dust from breakfast. I opened the fridge, closed it, sat down at the table. I listened to the hum of the heater, the sound of the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down. It was Christmas Day, and I was alone in the house where every holiday had once been filled with noise, with light, with overlapping voices. I'd made breakfast for 7 people that morning. They had all eaten, thanked me, told me to smile more. Then they'd taken the photo without me, and they laughed, together. Like I was a shadow they'd finally learned to erase. I closed my eyes and thought of one moment, just one where I had felt genuinely wanted, not needed, not tolerated, wanted. I couldn't find it. The house around me felt suddenly larger, like the walls were pulling back, letting the distance between us stretch out, until I was the only figure in a vast, echoing stage. My mug of untouched cocoa sat beside me, the peppermint swirl, now a faded ring along the ceramic edge. I traced it with my finger, not knowing why. When I stood, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I walked down the hall, past the framed photographs of birthdays and vacations. Some I had taken, some I was in. All of them now seemed to mock me. Their smiles, their warmth, was any of it ever true? My father's room was dark, untouched since the funeral. His slippers still by the bed, his coat still on the hook. He used to call me the glue, said I was what held us together. Maybe they didn't want glue anymore. Maybe they liked falling apart. I returned to the living room, picked up my phone, stared at the thread again. A part of me still wanted to believe it was a mistake, that someone would call, that someone would say, "We didn't mean it, we're sorry." But the phone stayed silent. They had posted it to Facebook too, public, dozens of likes. Aunt Terry commented, "Where's Lydia?" No one answered her. I didn't either, because I didn't know anymore. Before I became the ghost in their photo, I was the daughter who came home, the sister who answered every call, the one who always said yes, even when it meant putting down the life I had spent years building. I remember the day I made the decision. My mother had died in her sleep, a brain aneurysm, no warning, just gone. My father called me at 4:23 a.m., his voice small broken. I had been living in Boston, then working for a mid-sized tech firm, climbing the ladder, pitching ideas, closing deals. I'd just been promoted. My apartment had skyline views. I was building something real. I flew home that morning. I didn't think twice, didn't ask who else was coming, didn't pause to protect my time or my grief. I just packed a bag and left. The funeral was a blur of covered dishes, trembling hugs, and people whispering about how strong I was. My siblings wept, loudly. Emma fainted on the church steps. Nora screamed at a florist for using white lilies instead of pale pink. James drank too much wine and sobbed into my lap. I held them all. I fed them, organized the wake, and made sure Dad took his pills. Then after a week, they left. They went back to their children, their jobs, their curated routines, and I stayed. At first it was temporary. I worked remotely, turned the guest room into an office, took calls with earbuds in while I stirred Dad's oatmeal. I told myself I was lucky that I could still do it all. But remote work came with fewer opportunities. They stopped including me in the big meetings. My name wasn't listed on proposals I'd helped write. I felt myself slipping through the cracks, becoming invisible, even on Zoom. When Dad's condition worsened, early-stage Parkinson's compounded by grief and loneliness, I let the job go. They gave me a polite severance. I thanked them. I remember closing the laptop for the last time and feeling like I'd hung up the last piece of a life I once believed was mine. I don't regret caring for my father. I regret believing it would mean something to anyone else. The days blurred. Medications, physical therapy, cleaning, grocery runs. I learned how to change bed linens with one hand, how to bathe someone with dignity, how to hide my fatigue in front of hospice workers. There were nights I didn't sleep at all nights when Dad would cry out for my mother, and I would sit beside him in the dark, holding his hand until morning. Emma visited once every 3 months. Nora brought her kid, but always complained about the drive. James sent money sometimes, and once a large fruit basket with a card that read, "Hang in there, sis." No one asked me if I was okay, but I told myself it didn't matter. I was doing what mattered. I was the reliable one, the tether, the thread that kept the whole thing from unraveling, and I was proud of that. Foolishly, maybe, but deeply. I missed weddings. I missed promotions. I missed a man I had been falling in love with, one who said he didn't know how to be with someone whose life wasn't hers anymore. When he left, I didn't even cry. I just folded his shirts and sent them back. For every holiday I cooked, I decorated. I picked gifts that matched their lives, their styles, their children's latest obsessions. I didn't expect much in return, just a seat at the table, a shared laugh, a nod of appreciation. And sometimes I got it. The Christmas 2 years ago, Emma toasted to Lydia, who holds this family together. She was tipsy, but I clung to the words like a medal. Nora hugged me tightly and said, "I don't know how you do it." James told me I should open a catering business. I laughed, said maybe. But those moments were breadcrumbs, just enough to keep me believing I was part of the whole, that my sacrifices mattered, that when all this was over, when Dad was gone, we'd still have each other, that the years I gave away would be remembered not as absence, but as love. I didn't count the costs. I never asked for repayment, but I had this quiet belief that one day it would be seen, that love had memory. When Dad passed last spring, I remember the silence. No one asked me what I needed. They asked me what the plan was. Emma wanted a closed casket. Nora didn't want her daughter to see that. James asked if we could do the service quickly so he wouldn't miss a conference. I nodded, said I'd handle it, and I did. I chose the music. I wrote the obituary. I selected the photo, the one where Dad is smiling at Mom like he still can't believe she chose him. The siblings came dressed in obligatory black. They spoke in vague platitudes. Then they left once again, leaving me in the quiet of the home we all once grew up in. Except now, it was just mine, and his memory. I kept the place up, cleaned out the basement, donated most of Mom's clothes, set up a little art corner by the window where Dad used to sit. I started painting again, nothing fancy, just colors, light memory. I thought maybe now we'd get closer, without the weight of care, without the roles we'd all been playing. Maybe they'd come over more. Maybe we'd talk like siblings again. But the months passed, and they didn't call. Not much. I sent updates, photos, little check-ins. I got emojis in return. Still, I didn't let bitterness bloom. I told myself love was patient, that they were grieving in their own way. I didn't expect celebration, just inclusion, a call, a text, a knock on the door. Instead, I got cropped out of the only family photo that ever mattered. It wasn't one moment. It never is. I used to believe people leave all at once. A slammed door, a final word, a fight that burns the bridge to ash. But that's not how it happens, not with family. They don't leave. They just stop showing up. And eventually you stop asking them to. It started small. The kind of things you can explain away if you want to. James missed my birthday, twice. Once he said it was a work thing. The next year he said his assistant forgot to remind him. I laughed it off. I didn't want to be the kind of person who kept score, but I remembered. Emma stopped calling. When I reached out, she said she was just overwhelmed with the kids. I understood. I sent care packages, offered to babysit. She said she'd call soon. She didn't. Nora changed first, though. I used to be her person, the one she called when she and her husband fought, when her daughter had a fever, when she needed a recipe or a place to cry. One day, I called her just to say hi. She answered distractedly and said, "Sorry, can't talk." We're doing family night. She meant her husband and their daughter, not me. I should have let it go. I should have seen it for what it was. But I kept showing up, hosting, planning, offering rides to the airport, remembering anniversaries. I kept thinking if I loved them harder, more visibly, more generously, it would come back to me. But it didn't. They started calling me Saint Lydia. At first it was teasing, then it became something else, something that didn't feel like admiration. Let Lydia handle it. She always does. She loves being the martyr. She doesn't even have a real job anymore. She has time. Those words said in passing settled in my bones like cold. It wasn't just what they said. It was how they said it. The tone, the glances, the way their eyes would flick to one another when I offered to help then look away, like I was something to manage, not include. One Thanksgiving I cooked for 3 days, brined the turkey, baked 3 kinds of pie, even made a vegetarian stuffing for Nora's daughter. They showed up late. James was on the phone half the time. Emma complained about the chairs. Nora brought store-bought rolls and then made a joke about how Lydia goes full Martha Stewart when she doesn't have anything else to do. I smiled, laughed even. But later that night, I scrubbed the pans alone while their laughter drifted down the hallway, muffled by closed doors. I stood at the sink, hands wrinkled from soap and heat, and felt something hollow start to grow inside me. I wasn't part of the evening. I was the help, and it kept happening. Photos would be posted from family outings I hadn't been invited to. Inside jokes I didn't understand. Plans made without me. Once I saw them all at the local fair, a picture on Nora's Instagram cotton candy, matching shirts. When I asked about it, Emma said, "Oh, it was last minute. We didn't think you'd want to come." They didn't think I'd want to come to the fair with my family. I didn't argue. I just nodded. But I remember going into the garage that night and screaming into an old towel until my voice cracked. I didn't want them to hear, didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd hurt me. Again. After that, I stopped asking to be included, but I still hoped. I thought maybe if I stayed kind, stayed available, they'd remember who I was. Not the martyr, not the housekeeper, but their sister, the one who had braided their hair before dances, who drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to pick up James when his car broke down in college, who held Emma while she sobbed on the bathroom floor the night before her wedding. But memories fade, especially when they no longer serve the narrative people have chosen to believe. I started painting more, quiet scenes, empty chairs, windows with light spilling through. I didn't show them to anyone. It felt too vulnerable, like they might laugh at this too, or worse, not care at all. Dad's study became my refuge. His old books still lined the walls. The armchair where he'd read the paper every morning was exactly as he left it. Sometimes I'd sit there with his cardigan around my shoulders and pretend he was still downstairs calling up for coffee. He used to tell me I was the center of the family. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe I was just the placeholder until everyone else got strong enough to stand without me. There was a moment sometime in early fall when it all crystallized. We were having dinner. I'd made coq au vin, spent hours on it, lit candles, played music. It was one of those rare evenings when they all came. I thought it might be turning around. I thought maybe this was the night we started over. In the middle of the meal, Nora looked up from her plate and said, "You know what's wild? Sometimes I forget you even live here." They all laughed, light, careless laughter. James added, "You're like the house ghost, always floating around." I laughed too, quietly, but something inside me cracked, because I realized they didn't forget. They chose not to see me. They preferred the version of me that stayed silent, stayed useful, stayed small. That night, after they left, I stood in front of the mirror and tried to find my own face. Not the helper, not the glue, just me. And I couldn't. It was a Tuesday afternoon, cool and damp, the kind of day that settles into your skin. I had just returned from the Market Arms, sore from carrying groceries, sweater sleeves damp from an unexpected drizzle. I left the bags on the kitchen counter, kicked off my shoes, and went upstairs to rest. Nora's daughter, Ava, was staying with me for the afternoon. Something about a half day at school, and Nora's work running late. I didn't mind. Ava liked the quiet of my house. We'd paint red sometimes, just sit and do puzzles without speaking. She was soft like that, an echo of the little girl I once helped raise, while Nora struggled through postpartum fog and long silences. That day, Ava asked to use my tablet to watch something. I handed it over without thinking. She curled up on the couch while I made her a snack, sliced apples, a little bowl of peanut butter, a dash of cinnamon, the way she liked it. I was placing the plate beside her when I heard the ping, a notification from a messaging app I didn't recognize. Family HQ. The icon was bright green. My stomach went still. Ava looked up at me and smiled. "Oh, that's Mommy's group. It's like where they talk about stuff. She used your tablet once. It saved it, I guess." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. She turned back to her show. I stood there, hand frozen on the edge of the tray, while my heart began to drum hard in my chest. I told myself I wouldn't open it, that it wasn't meant for me, that it would hurt. But curiosity is never idle, especially when it already suspects betrayal. I tapped the screen. It opened instantly. The thread was filled with names I knew: Emma, James, Nora, their spouses, even a few of their friends. The banner image was the same cropped Christmas photo, and the messages were a quiet massacre. Nora, she seriously wore that apron again, the one that says domestic goddess. I can't. James, she thinks she's like keeping us together. Honestly, it's creepy. Emma, every year she acts like we owe her something, just for being sad and alone. Like, sorry, your life is a Hallmark movie without the romance. Someone named Kendra. Why doesn't she just get a therapist, Nora? Because then she wouldn't be able to guilt us with her casseroles and tragic sighs. They kept going. Jokes about my clothes, my single status, the way I hovered at family events. James had made a meme, my face photoshopped next to a saint with a halo made of Tupperware. Emma had added a gif of someone slowly fading out of a photo with the caption, "How to Lydia-proof your family album." And then came the line that shifted everything. James' house is technically ours now. Right? Dad's will didn't list her. We should get the paperwork rolling. Sell before she realizes. I stopped breathing. I stared at the words, read them over and over and over. Didn't list her. But that wasn't possible. I was there. I was with Dad when he updated the will. I had driven him to the notary. I remembered the smell of the office, the way his hand trembled as he signed. He'd said, "I want it equal. You've done more than your share, but they're still your siblings. Equal." But I had never seen the final copy. The lawyer was James's friend. He'd handled it, told me not to worry. And I didn't. Because who worries when your own blood says we'll take care of it? My legs buckled beneath me. I sat on the floor beside the couch, silent. Ava didn't notice. She was humming softly, her eyes glued to the screen. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't afford the luxury. My body was frozen, mind-whirring, compiling, cross-referencing every word, every gesture, every omission. It all aligned now. The distance, the jokes, the subtle power plays. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been positioned slowly, deliberately, as the outsider. They had rewritten the narrative in real time while I was busy setting the table. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and stared out the window. The backyard was empty. Bare trees, brittle grass, wind tossing dead leaves into corners. How many years had I spent making this house a home, repainting Dad's room after chemo, replacing the roof when no one else would chip in, installing the new dishwasher myself when it broke 2 days before Thanksgiving. And now they wanted to erase me from it, quietly, legally. I called the lawyer. He sounded nervous, said things like, "You'd have to speak with James and I only filed what I was given." He refused to send me a copy of the will, said I wasn't authorized. I hung up without saying goodbye. I called the notary's office, asked for a record. They said there'd been 2 drafts. One was signed. The other never made it past edits. I requested a date. It was after the one Dad had signed with me there, after his tremor had worsened, after he stopped remembering what day it was, after James had visited alone for a weekend I hadn't been told about. I knew then with a sick certainty that the final version was not what Dad had intended, that my brother had used grief and confusion to tilt the scales. I sat in the dark until Ava's mom arrived. Nora smiled at me, said thanks. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her voice was warm. I looked at her and realized I didn't know her at all anymore. That night, I printed every screenshot, every message, every photo. I put them in a folder, labeled it erasure, and I made a call not to my siblings, but to a real estate lawyer. When she asked what kind of case this was, I said softly, "Not a case, just a reckoning." The day of the dinner, I was up before the sun. The house was too still, too aware of what was about to happen. I moved through it with a strange calm, like someone preparing for a funeral with no body to bury. I ironed the linen napkins, polished the wine glasses, set the table with the silverware my mother had inherited from her grandmother, the ones we only used at Easter. I made beef bourguignon, the dish my siblings always requested when they needed comfort but never remembered the name of. I lit candles, not the scented kind, tall white ones, clean, elegant, like a cathedral. I wore black, not mourning black, power black, a fitted dress with sleeves that skimmed my wrists, heels that clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. I wore my hair down, long loose the way it looked before the years made me pull it back out of convenience. I applied lipstick, red, the kind that doesn't apologize. At 6 sharp they arrived. Nora first, her daughter in tow, bouncing with a coloring book under one arm. James and his wife followed, laughing too loudly in the entryway. Emma last, rushing in with a bottle of wine and her usual exhale of performative exhaustion. "Wow," she said, eyes scanning the room. "It looks intense." I smiled. "It's a special night. They took their places. They didn't ask what made it special." Dinner was quiet at first. The food did what it always did. Softened their edges, gave them something to praise that didn't require vulnerability. James, you should open a restaurant. Emma, still can't believe you do this all yourself. Nora, it's like being in a magazine. I nodded, said thank you, kept my voice light. I let the evening settle into the illusion they were most comfortable with, that I was here to serve, to smile, to fade politely into the background. It was halfway through the second glass of wine when I reached beneath the table and placed the folder on my lap. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I simply opened it, removed 3 printed stacks, one for each of them, and placed them beside their plates, like a menu for a new course. "What's this?" Emma asked, her hand pausing over her fork. "Something I thought we should all look at together," I said. They began to flip through. The silence was swift and sharp. No gasps, no denials. Just pages turning faces, tightening a collective stillness that wrapped itself around the table like a noose. Nora was the first to speak. How did you? Ava used my tablet. The messages were still logged in. James looked up, his face red. Lydia, you weren't supposed to. I know I said. I was never supposed to see anything. Emma's voice wobbled. It was jokes. Just jokes. We were venting. You know how family can be. I do, I said. I just didn't realize I wasn't part of it. No one moved. I reached into the folder again and pulled out the second envelope. Thicker, legal paper, real estate documents, signatures, terms, my name. I sold my share of the house, I said, to an external buyer. It closed yesterday. James shot upright. You what? It was never listed in the will, I said. But the original draft, the one Dad signed with me there, that was notarized and time-stamped. It's enough to claim equitable interest, especially given my role as primary caregiver. I found a lawyer who agreed. Nora blinked. You can't just sell the house, I can. And I did. Emma's voice turned shrill. You're kicking us out of our family home. I looked at her, really looked. The family home you excluded me from, cropped me out of, mocked me for caring about that home. They were quiet. I stood, smoothed the dress that had not wrinkled once. You can stay here for the rest of the week. The new owner doesn't take possession until Monday. James muttered something. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I won't fight with you, I said, and I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see things clearly now, and I'm done pretending. Emma's hands were shaking. You didn't have to make it public. We're family. No, I said gently. We were proximity, obligation, history. But family doesn't laugh while cutting you out. I didn't wait for their response. I walked out of the dining room, heels echoing through the hallway, and closed the door behind me. I went upstairs, took off the dress, hung it carefully, and slipped into something warm. They stayed downstairs for a while, arguing, I think, trying to assign blame. I didn't care. Let them scramble through the wreckage they'd spent years pretending didn't exist. When they left, they didn't say goodbye. I heard the door shut, heard their cars fade into the night. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the fire, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to notice I was gone. The silence after they left was not the silence I had grown used to, the kind that hummed with neglect, with the ache of absence. This one was clean, crisp. It didn't ask anything of me. It just was. I stayed in the house that final weekend, like someone walking through a museum of their own extinction. I dusted the picture frames, touched the backs of chairs, sat for an hour in Dad's recliner, my legs curled beneath me, holding the sweater he always wore on cold mornings. I lit one of Mom's old lavender candles and let it burn until the wax pooled into stillness. On Sunday night, I cooked myself a meal, just for me. Salmon, roasted potatoes, a small salad. I ate slowly, without anyone to feed anyone to impress. I poured a glass of wine and left the dishes in the sink. I slept with the windows cracked open, the winter air brushing against my skin, like a whisper, not a warning. And in the morning, I locked the door for the last time. The buyer was a couple from Vermont, quiet, older, looking for a slower life. They loved the crown moldings and the original banister. They told me they'd take care of the garden. I believed them. I left the keys in a blue ceramic dish by the entryway and walked away with nothing in my hands but a single suitcase and a folder filled with documents I'd never have to read again. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even the lawyer. I drove north, took back roads, slept in small motels with floral bedspreads and vending machines that buzzed. I kept my phone off, stopped checking for missed calls that wouldn't come. Somewhere in upstate New York, I found the cabin. It wasn't much. A single room plus a bathroom, wood stove, a porch that looked out onto a lake the color of bruised glass. The woman renting it said it was off-season. I could stay as long as I liked. Cash preferred. I stayed. The first days were quiet in a way that felt like detox. I slept 12 hours, took long walks, drank black coffee, let the cold air peel back the layers of performance I had worn for years, the helper, the buffer, the forgiver. And when I was ready, I started to paint again. Not scenes of family gatherings or symbolic rebirth, no tortured metaphors, just windows, doors, light falling onto empty rooms, the kind of paintings that don't tell you how to feel, they just give you a place to feel it. There was one I kept returning to, a single chair beneath a high window light, pooling at its feet. Nothing else in the frame, no people, no story, just presence. I named it, This Is Enough. I didn't miss them, not in the way people say they do. What I missed was the idea of them, the version I had carried in my chest, like an heirloom, long after it had cracked and splintered. The truth was, I had never belonged. I had served. I had enabled. I had filled the cracks in their lives so they wouldn't have to see how much was missing. When I stopped doing that, they didn't just move on. They punished me for making them notice the absence. One afternoon, I received a letter, Emma's handwriting. I didn't open it, just held it for a moment, then dropped it into the wood stove, watched it curl, blacken, disappear. I don't know what it said. I don't care. I live now by the rhythm of my own making. I wake when I want. I eat what I cook. I speak only when I feel moved to. The lake changes color every day, and I let it. The past no longer bangs on the door like a debt collector. It just lives in the other room, quiet, fading. Sometimes I think of my father, of how his eyes crinkled when he called me the glue. I think he meant it as love, and maybe it was. But glue isn't meant to be seen, only to hold the broken pieces together. I'm not glue anymore. I'm the piece that got out before it shattered. The first time I laughed, really laughed, after everything I was alone in the woods, chasing a bird I couldn't name. It darted between branches like it was mocking me, its feathers a brilliant blue that reminded me of the dress I wore to Nora's wedding. I tripped over a root and landed on my back, breathless, the cold, damp earth pressing against my spine. And I laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes something loose. Not joy, not yet, but recognition of absurdity, of survival, of the fact that I was still here. I lay there for a long time, looking up at the bare canopy, watching the branches cross like fingers in prayer. The bird vanished, but the feeling stayed, this strange, pulsing aliveness that I hadn't felt in years. I thought about calling someone to tell them, but there was no one to call, and that somehow was part of the relief. The cabin had no internet, no television, just a radio. I kept tuned to static and a stack of books I brought from a secondhand store in town. I reread old favorites, discovered new ones, let stories carry me into lives that were not my own, that didn't ask me to fix them. I wrote letters I never sent, pages filled with words I'd swallowed over the years, apologies I had no business making, questions I no longer needed answers to. Why didn't you ever ask how I was? Why was I always the one cleaning up? What did I do that made it so easy for you to forget me? I burned them all, each letter, each unsent plea. I fed them to the stove like offerings, watched the smoke curl into the rafters and disappear. Some nights I dreamt of the house, not the real one, the one my mind built out of memory and myth. In the dream, I walked through the hallways barefoot. The floorboards creaked, but the walls were silent. Doors opened into empty rooms. The kitchen smelled like rosemary. My father's voice echoed, but I couldn't find him. I always woke before I reached the back door. I never minded. There were mornings when I caught myself reaching for my phone instinct, tugging at my hand like muscle memory. I wondered if they had tried to contact me, if the sale of the house had spiraled into drama, if Emma had cried, if James had raged, if Nora had whispered I didn't think she'd really do it, but I never turned it on. I had nothing left to prove. I began painting self-portraits, not traditional ones, no faces, just impressions. A coat draped over a chair, a cup left half full on a windowsill, footprints in snow leading to nowhere. It was strange putting myself in the center of the canvas, stranger still to feel okay doing it. I sold a few pieces to the local gallery. The owner, a kind woman with silver hair and an eye for things others missed, asked me where I learned to paint. I told her I used to decorate grief like a hostess setting a table. She said, "Well, you do it beautifully." There were no holidays that year, no tree, no stockings, just a quiet Thursday with cinnamon tea and a fire that crackled like applause. I listened to carols on the radio, old ones that didn't demand cheer and felt no bitterness, only space. I stopped using my last name at the gallery, not to hide, just to begin again. There was a man who came in often, soft-spoken, wore corduroy jackets and smelled like cedar. He asked about my paintings, but never too much. Said once, "There's a kind of solitude in your work that doesn't feel lonely." I liked that. We had coffee, talked about books. He never asked about my past. I never offered it. Maybe that's what healing is, not forgetting, but choosing not to carry the story like it's a debt you still owe. I began writing again, not diaries, not letters, just words that asked nothing of me. Some days I wrote about the lake, other days about the quiet grief of spoons left out on counters. Sometimes I wrote about a woman with no family who found her way by walking away. And sometimes, only sometimes, I let myself wonder if they ever missed me. But the thought didn't ache the way it used to. It floated through me like a leaf on water, brief, weightless, gone. Spring came slowly. The ice on the lake broke in wide, jagged sheets, drifting apart like continents no longer held together by habit. I watched it each morning from the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl, a mug of black tea warming my hands. The silence no longer startled me. It had become a companion, one that listened without pressing. By April, green had begun to thread itself through the trees. The path behind the cabin softened the earth, loosening under my boots, pine needles pressing into the soles. I walked further each day, letting the air braid itself into my hair, into the quiet chambers of my heart that still pulsed with memory. It was during one of those walks that I found the mailbox. Half buried rusted its flag, stuck in an awkward upright salute. It stood at the edge of what had once been a trail, long since overgrown. I opened it without thinking, expecting it to be empty. Instead, there was a single envelope inside. No name, no stamp. Just the kind of plain, trembling paper that carries weight without speaking. I didn't open it right away. I held it to my chest, then slipped it into my coat pocket and walked back to the cabin. I left it on the table for days, moving it from place to place, like a pebble I wasn't sure belonged in my shoe or my collection. When I finally opened it, the handwriting was unmistakable. Nora, not the tight, perfect cursive she used on thank you cards. This was looser, uneven, like it had been written through a throat clenched with silence. It read, "I don't know what we thought we were doing. Maybe we didn't think at all. You were always there, and I guess we stopped seeing what that meant, or who you were beneath it. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I wanted you to know. I miss you. Ava asks about you. Every time it snows. Love, Nora." I folded the letter and set it beside the stove. I didn't burn it, but I didn't answer either. Not because I hated her, because the part of me that once needed her to see me had finally gone quiet. The truth was, they hadn't taken anything from me that I hadn't first surrendered. My time, my care, my sense of place. I had handed it over inch by inch in the name of loyalty, of duty, of love. And when they gave nothing back, I kept giving. Until I didn't. Until the silence that followed wasn't abandonment, it was release. I sat on the floor that night, bare feet pressed to cool planks, and thought of my mother. She used to say, "You don't need to be understood by everyone, just by yourself when the room gets quiet." I never understood it. Not until now. Understanding myself didn't come like thunder. It came like water, slow, soft, wearing down the parts of me that had been shaped by need. There were still moments when the past tapped gently on the window, a familiar scent, a dream, the reflex to call James when I heard a song he used to love. But those moments no longer opened doors. They were just echoes, and echoes fade. One afternoon, the man from the gallery, his name was Caleb, I had learned brought over a box of brushes he found at an estate sale. Thought you might find use for them, he said, placing them on my porch step like an offering. He didn't stay. He never assumed. That was his gift. Inside the box was a single note, "Old tools, new hands." I kept that one. There were new paintings, a series of open doorways, no figures, no backstory, just light and shadow, invitation without expectation. I titled them Inheritance. They sold quickly. People asked what they meant. I told them they were about reclaiming space. No one questioned me. No one cropped me out. By midsummer, I had stopped counting the days. Time no longer stretched in front of me like something to endure or repair. It simply passed. Like the wind through the pine trees, present unseen, shaping the world without asking for permission. I'd developed a rhythm, mornings on the porch with tea, long walks through the woods, sometimes barefoot when the ground was soft, afternoons with a paintbrush or a book music playing low on the radio, evenings by the stove, a single candle lit as if in quiet prayer. There was no calendar on the wall, no alarms, no reminders, and still I remembered everything that mattered. I thought of Dad often not as a wound, but as a presence. I spoke to him sometimes in the way you speak to the water when it reflects something familiar. I imagined what he would say if he saw me now. "You look like your mother." That's what he would say. She had been quiet too, strong in a way that didn't announce itself. People underestimated her, mistook her silence for smallness. But I saw her, the way she carried grief in her palms, like seeds, not weights. The way she made beauty out of nothing, the way she refused to disappear. Maybe I was more like her than I ever realized. One morning, I found an old photograph tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in years. It was from my 30th birthday, before everything broke, before Dad's illness, before the slow erosion of inclusion. We were all smiling, James with his arm around me, Emma making a face, Nora laughing mid-bite. I was in the center holding a cake. I looked happy. I wasn't. I remembered that night, how I had planned every detail, how they had all shown up late, how Emma made a joke about me being extra, how I cleaned up alone while they drank in the living room, how I told myself it didn't matter because I was with family. I burned the photo, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed to remember the version of me who begged to be seen. There's a difference between healing and forgetting. Forgetting is passive. Healing is deliberate. Each brushstroke, each breath, each boundary I drew, they were acts of remembering who I was before I was shaped by their absence. I had a visitor one evening, unannounced, but not uninvited. Caleb. He stood at the edge of the porch, hands in his pockets, a bottle of wine cradled in one arm. I was driving past, he said. Thought I'd see if the artist in residence would share her view. I nodded toward the second chair. We sat in silence for a while, watching the lake catch the last of the light. The sky turning gold, then bruised blue, then nothing at all. He asked eventually about the new series I'd shown him, the ones I hadn't titled yet. They're about absence, I said, but not the painful kind, the kind that leaves room for something else, like space, he said. I nodded. He didn't ask questions about what had come before. He never had. And I didn't offer. Instead, I asked him about his favorite book. He said it changed every year, that this year it was one about trees, how they communicate underground, how they warn each other of danger, how they protect the young by sheltering them with shade. Maybe people could learn from them, he said. Or maybe we can only grow once we stop waiting to be protected, I replied. He smiled at that, lifted his glass. To the trees, he said. To the space between them, I answered. That night, I slept without dreams. No houses, no doors, no ghosts, just darkness, full quiet hole. The final painting I completed before the first snowfall was the smallest I'd ever done. Just a square canvas, 12 inches by 12, no frame, no signature. It was of a room with no windows, just a single beam of light coming from a ceiling crack, illuminating a cracked teacup on the floor. There were no walls, just suggestion shadow space. I called it reclamation. It wasn't meant to sell. It wasn't meant for anyone else. I hung it by the door of the cabin, the last thing I see before stepping out into the world, the first thing I pass when I come home. It reminds me that even the smallest thing, even the thing they forgot dropped broke, can still hold light. I heard from Emma once more, a voicemail. Her voice tight, brittle, carrying all the weight of a person who wasn't sure if they were entitled to their own sorrow. Lyd, I wanted to say I didn't know. About the will. About James. I don't know what I thought. We didn't mean to lose you. Or maybe we did. I don't know anymore. I hope you're okay. I hope you found something better. You deserve that. I didn't call back, not because I hadn't heard her, but because I had. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I didn't need her to be better. I didn't need apologies shaped like questions. I didn't need her to rewrite what had already been carved into the wood of my memory. I had rewritten it myself. Caleb started visiting more often. He brought wildflowers once, a book of poetry, a jar of honey from a market 3 towns over. He never stayed too long, never lingered too close. I liked that about him. He once asked me, "Do you ever think of going back?" I didn't hesitate. "No," I said, not because there's nothing there, but because there's nothing left for me. He nodded like he understood that wasn't bitterness. It was clarity, and clarity I've learned is not cold. It's warm, quiet, a soft room in the center of the storm where you finally sit down and exhale. The lake froze again. I painted it once, then twice, and each time it looked different. Still but not stagnant, cold but not lifeless. Underneath that surface, things were moving, sleeping, becoming, like me. When I tell people my story now, when I tell it at all, I don't lead with betrayal. I don't speak of what was taken. I speak of what I found. Not revenge, not closure, just space, just breath. Just the self I had long abandoned in service of belonging. And when I look at the life I live now, this small, clear life with its cracked teacups and soft beams of light, I see something no one can crop out, overlook, or rewrite. I see me, exactly where I belong. Some treasures had been recovered, others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.